I'm sure you'll get exceptional pleasure from watching today's episode. You shouldn't just listen to it, but also watch, because we'll be talking about 3 stunningly beautiful porcelain techniques that were once created in Europe. I won't keep you waiting. Pour your favorite drink into your favorite porcelain cup and let's get started. Let me remind you that the channel has a playlist called White Gold, where you can find other materials about European and Russian porcelain. It's constantly being updated, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for new episodes. Today, there are 3 stories about talent, genius, dedication to one's craft, and a bit of an English-style detective tale. Those who have been to Tsarskoye Selo in the Catherine Palace surely remember these stunningly beautiful vases. This delicate porcelain technique is called Boule de Neige, which translates from French as snowball, named after the variety of viburnum that blooms with lush flowers at the beginning of summer. The vases we see in the White State Hall of the Catherine Palace are among the very first vases made at the Meissen factory under the direction of Johann Candler, the creator of this technique. Candler invented this decoration to adorn a dinner service that the Polish King Augustus III gave to his wife Maria Josefa for their 20th wedding anniversary in 1739. The floral decoration turned out to be so delightful that from then on, the artists at the manufactory began using it for various items. Orders for Boule de Neige pieces were scheduled months in advance. For example, it is known that in 1760, King Frederick the Great of Prussia ordered 6 vases for his collection at once. In Russia, Meissen's Boule de Neige appeared during the reign of Elizabeth Petrovna. By the way, these were not just ordinary vases, but scent vases, which were popular among European aristocracy at the time. They were used to scent rooms or, for example, during dinner to eliminate the smell of food. The container would be filled with dried aromatic herbs and flowers, which were then set alight and covered with a lid. We can't see them, but there are holes in the body through which the fragrant smoke would escape. To create the effect of a snowy floral ball, porcelain makers would arrange and attach hundreds of tiny flowers onto the slip. This is extremely meticulous work. Antique examples of vases by Meissen in the Boule de Neige style are of museum quality, and the prices for such antiques are almost unimaginable. For comparison, I found a modern Boule de Neige piece by Meissen. It turns out that they are still being produced today, but only in very limited quantities. For example, this small vase, 19 centimeters tall and limited to just 50 pieces, costs, as you can see, 8,500 euros. Here is something similar to what we see in the Catherine Palace, but smaller, 29 centimeters in height. It is produced in a limited edition, only 10 pieces per year. Or here's another option, 58 centimeters tall. This one looks much more like the pieces displayed in Tsarskoye Selo. Only 50 of these items were produced in 2010. The price is also available upon request. If you have the desire and the means, you can purchase a copy of K. Ender's 18th century vases. No more than 5 of these pieces are produced per year. The price starts at 23,500 euros. Another seller offers this modern version from Meissen, recreated using molds from 1741 as part of a limited series, only 15 pieces, released in 2025. Someone took the time to count, and there are 4,000 flowers here. It was painted by the factory's contemporary artist, Katrin Müller. As you can see, even modern vases from Meissen are a luxury. But that's not a problem. For example, there's a more affordable option, tea sets painted by Meissen's contemporary artist, Ersten Greidler. Only 25 pieces were produced. That is, if we're talking specifically about Meissen pieces as the originator of this decorative technique. Of course, even back then, people tried to replicate the Boule de Neige decor. The French manufactory of Jacob Petit managed to do this quite admirably. Jacob Petit went from being an apprentice and journeyman to owning his own successful porcelain manufactory. His pieces are intricate, richly decorated, and imaginative. It's no surprise that he was drawn to the Boule de Neige technique, and he reproduced it more than once in his vases, pitchers, and perfume bottles. I found this version of Boule de Neige by Jacob Petit on one of the marketplaces. The price for such pieces ranges from $2,000 to $3,000. Speaking of our time, of course, many ceramicists also try to recreate this fantastic decoration, creating their own original masterpieces. It is believed that Boule de Neige is one of the most labor-intensive decorations and the most luxurious applied ornament in the history of porcelain art. Although, looking ahead, I have a few more contenders for the title of most labor-intensive. We'll talk about them later. But for now, next up is another unique collectible type of porcelain blush ivory. porcelain that looks as if it's covered with a blush. Who made such beauty blush? The artists of the English factory Royal Worcester. As a result of creative experiments in the last decades of the 19th century, porcelain with a warm ivory shade and a peach blush appeared. The new creation was complemented with floral painting and 22-karat gilding. Moreover, they managed to almost completely monopolize this original design, fiercely protecting their patent rights and actively filing lawsuits against imitators. That is why in England, Blash Ivory was produced only at Worcester, while abroad, similar items could be found from Austro-Hungarian companies. And it all began with a small, somewhat illicit desire to make copies of ancient amphorae. The process of creating such decoration was quite labor-intensive. The piece went through several stages of decoration and firing. What is important for attribution, a glossy ivory-colored glaze was applied to the interior of the piece, while the exterior was covered with a matte straw-colored glaze. During firing, the glazes would lighten slightly, giving the piece an effect of glowing from within, after which a soft peach glaze was airbrushed onto the piece to give it a blush. It was very timely that it was invented in those years. At the final stage, craftsmen would hand-polish the gilded details with a special fine mineral abrasive mixture. As a result, the shine of the gilding became less intense, imitating the patina of age. It was precisely this unique style that was appreciated by the distinguished public of those years, and it is still valued by collectors today as an antique. Floral compositions most often featured forget-me-nots, chrysanthemums, and daisies. But until 1900, artists were not allowed to sign their works, with the exception of Edward Raby, who was one of the main authors of many of the paintings. That is why his mark can be found on some pieces. At the turn of the century, blush porcelain became so popular that Royal Worcester decorated almost every possible series in the blush ivory style, from Japanese, Indian, and Persian plates to classic European ones. It's not hard to find blush ivory porcelain on marketplaces. Some options start at around $100. Rare shapes and pieces with artist markings are especially valued. Blush ivory was produced for a quarter of a century, up until about 1914. As I mentioned before, Royal Worcester did everything it could to fight against copies of its innovation. The factory specifically devised a marking system which still tells us a lot today. In addition to the factory mark, dots were used to indicate the production date. The numbers refer to the mold used to cast the pieces. The number in a frame is the patent number for the design. You can also find small, handwritten initials. These belong to the gilders. The letters ER, sometimes found next to the mark, indicate the work of Edward Raby. And these pieces are especially highly valued by collectors because it means that Raby painted the entire item by hand. And the third porcelain technique I want to tell you about today also belongs to Royal Worcester: reticulated or pierced porcelain. Many worked in this technique, but it was the Royal Worcester factory that managed to reach unsurpassed heights in this craft, all thanks to one man. This porcelain is even called George Owen porcelain. Owen started working at Worcester as a teenager in June 1859 when he was 13 years old. He was assigned to cut holes according to a template. This tea set is from 1858, a year before the future master began working at the factory. And this is a tea set made by Owen himself. He managed to master the creation of reticulated vessels with double walls. Such pieces were extremely expensive due to the high risk of damage during the multiple firings required. George Owen's proprietary technique was so secretive that very little is known about how he achieved such delicate carving. Even these few photographs, which were taken for advertising purposes, were shot only with the finished vases, so as not to reveal the process or the tools which the master had refined for himself over the years. For example, it is known that he used spokes from women's corsets, lubricated his cutter with oil, and measured the distances for incisions with a compass. Owen worked in a separate office, hiding his tools in a locked drawer every evening. Even his own son, who also worked at the factory and brought his father thin-walled vessels for carving, was not allowed to witness the secret process of creating porcelain lace. He was able to recreate this perforated teapot, previously produced, without using any templates or stencils. Only just over 300 of these models were produced. I found one similar set, along with the teacup and saucer, at an auction. In March of this year, the set sold for $3,000. Looking at this delicate openwork, you can't help but admire the painstaking effort and talent of the master. George Owen worked on some pieces not just for days, but for months. And to prevent the blank from drying out, it was kept in a damp cabinet, taken out each morning so Owen could continue his work. Most often, he worked on several pieces at the same time. Of course, as with many other types of porcelain, the first reticulated pieces were made in China. In early descriptions, Chinese ceramicists referred to the technique of piercing porcelain as devil's work, because it required tremendous skill and was always accompanied by the constant risk of failure. But that's just the craftsman's slang. This kind of open-work porcelain was called lin long meaning exquisite or lu jiao, from the Chinese word for to let through. For example, like this teapot from the late 17th century. And this, for instance, is already from Europe. An open-work coffee pot from the 18th century by the Italian manufacturer Ginori. The French also excelled in the art of porcelain perforation. At Sèvres, under the direction of Alexandre Brongniart in the early 19th century, some of the first notable works were created. And in 1831, Sèvres invited the talented artist Hyacinthe Régnier to work with them. His sketches were inspired by Chinese models, but he successfully combined this Eastern exoticism with European traditions. Based on these sketches, several craftsmen fulfilled several royal commissions, including from 1837 to 1861 for Queen Marie Amélie, the wife of King Louis Philippe of France. For example, here is this one, crafted in a delicate pink color in 1855. Delightful, isn't it? And I found this version in the sales history of one of the auction houses. This is the very first of the sets commissioned by Queen Marie Amélie. She was no stranger to a passion for porcelain. Her father, Ferdinand IV, and even her grandfather, Charles III, were great patrons of porcelain and owned their own factory in Capodimonte. Maria Amélie was also in good porcelain company on her mother's side. Her mother, Maria Carolina of Austria, was the sister of Marie Antoinette. To this day, several other sets are known, of which this one is the earliest. Another, from 1840 with a pink base, is now part of the collection at the Louvre in Paris. A third set from 1841, with a coral red border, was presented to the Viceroy of Egypt, Mehmet Ali, by order of Louis Philippe, and is now in a private collection. A fourth set from 1842 with a green finish is now part of the collection at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Another set commissioned by Louis Philippe was part of Yves Saint Laurent's collection, and in 2009 it was sold at a Christie's auction for $361,000. Individual pieces from incomplete sets sometimes appear at auctions, for example, like this Louis Philippe Tea Duo from 1836, which was sold at Christie's in 2005 for $6,600. An incredible piece of work, wouldn't you agree? But from France, let's return to England, to George Owen. The works of Sèvres are impressive, but George Owen did something truly extraordinary with porcelain. Any wrong movement, he would have to start the work all over again. By the way, it's actually the defective pieces that help us unravel Owen's technique today. And this vase with the golden pheasant is the result of Owen's collaboration with the gilding artist Edward Salter. Of course, what we're seeing here are museum exhibits. Endless patience and skill brought previously existing decoration to perfection. George Owen worked at the factory for most of his life, creating thousands of the finest porcelain laces. I love making episodes like this. For me, it's always a powerful burst of energy that fills and inspires me. I'm looking forward to hearing your impressions in the comments. Just a reminder, in the White Gold playlist you'll always find other episodes about porcelain as well. Subscribe and see you next time!